could you just introduce yourself so that and your portfolio properly?
Well, I'm Dr. Dele Seteolu. I teach political science at the Lagos University. I'm an academic, a social critic, rights activist, labor activist, unionist. I'm also a public intellectual.
Yeah.
Morning.
It's a good time to be a political scientist in Nigeria presently, considering the political climate as it were in the country as it is presently. So being a political scientist, just looking at the political landscape in Nigeria generally, what are your views?
Well, Nigeria is not at peace. There are centrifugal forces. I mean, conflicting forces that are threatening, to dismember the country. Okay, there are greater agitations to address the national question. The country is characterized by, increasing ethnic and regional, and communal-based conflicts. The economy is in near tatters. That's why the pretense to economic reforms. And the government at the outset that promised change is not pursuing change. Nigerians are dissatisfied, Nigerians are disillusioned, and Nigerians are raising questions about, the capacity of this government to deliver the promised change. The socio-economy, the political economy, it's not impressive. Nigerians are impoverished, they're malnourished, they're increasingly pauperized by predatory political elite, But Nigeria is at the crossroads, if you ask me. And we should ask more questions. We should address the questions.
Of course,
it's about time to prefer, alternative agenda. Nigeria cannot continue the way it is. Well, there are doubts about the capacity of the leadership at the center to address the increasingly threatening, political and economic crisis. The absence of the president, who has been out of the country for about 67 days, makes it worse. And there's an acting president who is not really exercising political power. And there are insinuations about the hijack of the acting presidency by political cabal. And the National Assembly, the legislature, is behaving like rascals who are pursuing personal agenda to the detriment of national interests. Maybe Nigerians will need to challenge the National Assembly. Maybe we should teach the National Assembly a lesson. Maybe we should occupy the National Assembly and prevent legislation.
Let me take you up on agitations because I know that apart from being a senior lecturer at LASU, you're also an activist. You're a comrade, as people like to say. And so what is the political implication of the Arewa-Biafra exchange? Well, what do you think it portends for Nigeria politically?
Well, you know what? The bottom line is this. The tirades, on both sides suggest that that there are mistrust and mutual suspicion among the ethnic nationalities in Nigeria. Yeah, maybe we should not blame the ethnic nationalities. Maybe we should blame the political class that has failed to address concretely the national question. Okay, the exchanges are unusual in a country that is that pretends to be united, that pretends to be a nation. Nigeria certainly is not a nation. Nigeria is a nation state, an agglomeration of ethnic nationalities with different backgrounds, with different historicities, with different agenda, and are meeting at the center. The threats, are real. And the threat should not be ignored. You know, the northern elements, sorry I'm using the word, have the capacity to unleash terror at the expired date. The law will depend on the state and the security apparatus to nip it in the bud. And would need to do more than grandstanding and grandiloquence. Okay? The resurgence, permit me to use that word, of ethnic and ethnic nationality-based agitations are pointers to the fact that the relationship, the political and economic relationships with Nigeria are asymmetrical and dysfunctional. And we need to address the structural distortions and imbalances that exist within the Nigerian political economy. We cannot continue to pretend about it. Okay? There is a national question that must be addressed. And it must be addressed concretely. And we must address it holistically, the whole gamut of the national question. Citizen question, settler question, the economic question, political superstructure, etc., must be dealt with. We cannot continue to pretend, otherwise Nigeria will continue to be in the abyss of underdeveloped and backward countries.
Oh, okay. The national questions, I've heard a lot about the national questions and how we need to address the national questions promptly. And then this is one of, or several of the things that the confab was supposed to address. But having done the confab and the stalling in implementing the recommendations of the confab, but do you now really think that the agitation should be about we want these certain people to leave our territory or our space? Shouldn't it be that we want the federal government to pursue the answering of the national question, implementing the recommendations of the confab? Don't you think it's all the agitations and exchanges are misplaced priorities?
Well, the agitations, the exchanges, the vituperation should be historically situated. No, the point is that there have been a couple of constitutional and national conferences before the 2014 conference.
True.
Okay, and there are claims that all of the conferences are equally legitimate, and that the reports of all of the conferences, including 2004, should be considered in terms of the content and the recommendations and conclusions. No, the point is, to date, none, or very little, of the reports and recommendations have been effectuated by the state.
So shouldn't this be the agitation of the people, the implementations of this, the recommendations of these conferences?
Well, you said in the obvious. Let me situate it this way. There are agitations to implement the recommendations of the 2014 conference and previous conferences. We should not assume that there are no pressures. The pressures do exist. At the level of civil society, at the level of ethnic-based organizations, at the level of ethnic nationalities, at the level of the media, and the rest of civil society. There are agitation, which we should not pretend does not exist. There are agitation, and there have been agitation, okay? But the point is, the agitations to implement coexist with the contradictions. The contradictions are still there, okay? The imbalances are still there. The mistrust still exists, okay? And that will likely create the vituperation, the tirades we're going through at the moment. So all of this coexist, okay? There are demands to implement the reforms. There are equally agitations. There are equally mistrusts, occasioned by differences in ownership and resource structure, and different perceptions of the political space and access to political power and so on and so forth. The issue is intricate, and we should, address this issue in a rather integrated and holistic sense to better appreciate the subject matter.
You made mention of the civil societies. Really, how would you assess the function of the civil society as a pressure group, because really they are supposed to be pressure groups to the government. How would you assess their responsibility as a pressure group in the current Nigeria?
Well, let me make this point. I actually meant civil society organizations.
Okay.
Okay, because theoretically, civil society convey a somewhat deeper and fundamental meaning.
Okay.
I meant non-state actors.
Okay.
Okay, particularly non-state actors that are canvassing alternative political and economic and social agenda to existing orthodoxies. By orthodoxies, I mean what exists at the moment. Okay, well, we knew what the civil society organizations were like, particularly in the military regimes. Okay, we were confronted at that point in time by military authoritarianism, denial of political rights, detention of political opposition, and economic backwardness, etc. So there was somewhat uniformity among the oppositions, including civil society, to disengage the military and civilianize the political space and restore democratic rule, etc., etc. There's this argument that since 1999, the civil society organizations have vacated the trenches and are somewhat, what do I use now? They're somewhat reticent about challenging, the state actors and raising crucial questions on the state and the economy. Well, this might be historically correct to some extent that, but again, there are quite a lot of deeper issues. We should appreciate this. Civil society, most of the civil society organizations are donor-funded, are donor-driven, and their agenda are defined by the donor institutions. I appreciate that about this time, the emphasis are on political rights and political issues, and then gender to some extent environmental, etc. The civil society groups to this extent are lacking, resources to mobilize the civil space. And there's also a question about decline in that mass, or what I call masses. In the 80s, we were in the struggle, In the 70s and the 80s, we had social movements. And the social movements included the students, the trade unions, organized labor, okay, the intellectual class, academic staff, universities, etc., etc. All of these constituted the social movements. And it was based on a clear ideology. We were clear by the ideological basis of the social movement. It was a mass in terms of mass membership, mass inclusion, mass participation on ideological basis, etc., etc. Regrettably, the entrance of military regime into the space, infiltrated the social movements, desecrated the social movements, and and social movements dissipated into civil society. And some are pro-state, several are pro-state, okay? And a few are anti-state and are actually canvassing alternative agenda. The problematic is that most of the civil society groups that are pro-state are not raising questions that are fundamental and not quite challenging the state. Several of the civil society groups have lost ideological character, okay? Have lost ideological content, okay? And rather romance the state and state actors.
Okay, I think we've had enough of ideological debate, and, but let's come home and let's talk about issues that are really germane to the people. And one of such is the recall of Dino Melaye that is currently raving in the social media. Can the Senate, the 8th Assembly, can they stop the recall of Dino Melaye?
Well, I'm not aware that the Nigerian Senate has constituted as such power. We should bear in mind that Senator Dino Melaye was elected by a senatorial district, by people. And, theoretically and empirically and in praxis, the sovereignty, political sovereignty, lies with the people, okay? They have the power to elect, a power to recall. you know, depending on the circumstance and so on and so forth. Okay? The Senate, you will be arrogantly usurping the power of the people, you know, of the senatorial district in Kogi to intervene in the question of recall. I suppose, politically, to a very large extent, the recall process lies with the institution of INEC and the people in question. And where the criteria have been satisfied, the recall process should and must be effectuated. And it will have the full force of law and political legitimation. So I really do not know what the role or what the power of the Senate would or could be in this instance. I'm not aware, I'm not familiar with any law that confers, you know, Senate the power to re-examine or reinterrogate the power conferred on INEC. The power is conferred by law on INEC to organize the recall process. And the people has the power. It's a natural right, you recall. And it evolved in the state of nature. You know, it's a natural right. Sovereignty at the outset was vested in the populace. But the populace, for the purpose of modern government and political organization, ceded political authority to state actors. And that was the origin of the state, as canvassed by who? By John Stuart Mill, you know, and the social contract theorists, J.J. Rousseau and the rest of them. This is the idea. So power lies in the people, and the people in Kogi, the specific senatorial district, you know, have the right to determine who would represent the senatorial district in Senate.
The eventual recall of Dino and what it means for his future as a political person in Nigeria.
Well, I would rather prefer, I said and I'll repeat, I think I still do not perceive Senator Dino Melaye as a political icon. We should not over-celebrate and romanticize, you know, political leaders who have hardly had impact on the populace. I would rather prefer we discuss the political implications of a recall process in Nigeria's political space. You recall, there's not been a recall process in Nigeria. This will be the inaugural, to be a milestone of sorts, to be a departure point. It will likely define or redefine the political landscape in terms of the capacity of the Nigerian people to actually exercise the power of recall and invoke the power of sovereignty. For me, it would be interesting to see the recall process go the whole hog. And the implications will likely be this. One, it will reaffirm the power of the people, that it will reaffirm the power of the populace. Secondly, you know, it will send signals to the political class that political power should be exercised with caution, with restraint, and with respect to the preferences and the wishes of the people at every point in time. Okay? And thirdly, it should check the tendency to personalization of political power and on representativeness that the National Assembly has assumed. Okay? The point I'm making is several of the representatives are distant from the from the constituencies they claim to represent. And where this power is invoked, it will check the shift or the tendency to unrepresentativeness. And somewhat, you know, compel the legislators to begin to reflect and consider the preferences and the wishes, you know, and the biases and the predilections of their constituencies. That is the bottom line. Okay, that is the bottom line. The legislators and the political class, you know, have been too arrogant, you know, and probably, you know, seem to have the perception that the people are lame duck and cannot and would not and would never invoke the power, you know, to determine who governs them. They can and they would. This might be the departure point, if you ask me.
If you're talking about this should serve as our last question, talking about the people really exercising their power, their political power. Let's look at the upcoming Lagos State Council elections and the various accusations, as it were, that has kind of circled the election about imposition of candidates and what have you. Apart from the party imposition that was glaring in the leading party, APC, and some other political parties too have actually came out to say that what the government is actually doing, the Lagos State government is doing through the Lagos State electoral body is to impose candidates on the people. What do you think about all of this?
Well, I'd prefer to situate the issue within national context. Most of the states, or rather local government, in most of the states, are led by sole administrators. In other words, the state governors deliberately prevent elections. And this violates the Constitution. The Constitution is clear that leadership at the local government level shall be through elected means. Okay? So, most of the states, irrespective of the political inclinations, you know, have violated this proviso of the Constitution. The local government ought to be the nearest level of government. It ought to reflect local aspirations, local preferences, local interests, etc. And it ought to be the domain of electoral politics and democratic practice. It ought not to be characterized by sole administratorship or political authoritarianism, etc. So this has been the experience in Lagos. Lagos had denied election for so long. There were pressures, and I suppose the pressures culminated in the election slated for 22nd July. Okay? The processes have been characterized by all sorts, you know, shenanigans, okay? Abuse of due process, political manipulations, and the godfathers are still holding sway. And there are claims and counterclaims of candidates in position in different constituencies and wards and so on and so forth. And the primaries, you recall, you know, were characterized by political violence. Private armies were deployed, wielding weapons. That again tells the nature of politics in Nigeria. You see, you should bear this in mind. I discussed earlier the capacity or seeming capacity of the people to invoke the power, you know, the political power as the sovereign. Well, we're still far from it, too. We're still far from it. It's still evolving. We're still far from it. It could be a lot better. Because I should recall this, that most of the councillors and the local government chairmen are barely known to the local populace. Okay? And why? It's possible to explain this. You know, the irony is this, that most of the councillors and local government chairmen are often produced by godfathers. Godfathers determine who contests what election on the platform of a political party. So the allegiance is to the godfathers rather than the constituencies, okay? Rather than the constituencies. So there'll be elections on 22nd July. There are no campaigns. The streets, the neighbors are quiet. You know, most of the citizens at the local level, you know, rarely know the candidates and what the political agenda are, what they intend to do, and the rest of it. So in the long run, would likely be electing candidates that are unrepresentative of the people. And there's been this pattern in local government elections in Nigeria. You know, most of the elections are characterized by low voter turnout. And that suggests that the people quite often do not know the candidates, do not have confidence in the candidates, and do not trust the candidates who deliver on social goods, and so on and so forth. Okay? We need to rethink the process of recruitment in local government. It's not been democratic. It's not been democratic. We need to rethink it.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. We really appreciate you spending time with us and coming
my
all
pleasure.
the way
Yeah.
and to have this interview with us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful.
Yeah, sure. We'll come if I'm invited some other time. I'd like to talk
we'll
again and again on the state and economy in Nigeria.
Of course, of
Okay.
course. We're
Yeah.
looking forward to another time.
Thank you for having me around.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.